Bon vespre, Ilan. Moltes gràcies a tots per ser aquí. Vos present, supos que tots els que sou aquí coneixeu a Ilan Pappe, però faré 5 cèntims de la seva biografia. Nascut a Haifa l'any 1954, és professor d'Història a la Universitat d'Exeter i codirector del Centre d'Estudis Etnopolítics d'Exeter. Anteriorment va ser professor de Ciències Polítiques a la Universitat de Haifa entre 1984 i 2007 i president de l'Institut Elmil-Tuma d'Estudis Palestins i Israelians entre 2000 i 2008. També va ser un dels fundadors de la coalició d'esquerres Hadash i candidat a les eleccions legislatives del 96 al 99. Ilan Pappe és un dels nomenats 9 historiadors israelians, un grup d'investigadors que a partir de la desclassificació de documents als anys 80 per part del govern dels Estats Units, Regne Unit i Israel han revisat la història moderna de l'estat d'Israel amb una mirada crítica cap al sionisme. És autor de llibres com Aquí bona Déu te'n parell, La neteja ètnica de Palestina, Una història de la Palestina moderna, La presó més gran de la Terra, i ara enguany, el 25, acaba de publicar Breve història del conflicte entre Israel i Palestina, perquè he vist que està traduït en el castellà per Capitán Swing. De fet, sincerament, com que li vaig darrere fa anys, no he pensat que coincidia en la presentació d'aquest llibre, la traducció en castellà, haguéssim pogut fer també la presentació del llibre aquí, però bueno, una altra ocasió. Pappe s'ha mostrat radicalment en contra de la creació de l'estat d'Israel, el qual responsabilitza de la manca de pau a l'Orient Mitjà, i és un ferm defensor de la creació d'un únic estat secular a la regió. Revisant informació, pensant la història recent d'aquest país, va caure en les meves mans una entrevista que li varen fer l'any 2021, després d'un dels múltiples bombardejos d'Israel sobre Gaza, i enmig d'un altre al foc, ell declarava en una entrevista: poden comptar els dies fins al pròxim cicle de violència. Malauradament aquest cicle no va trigar en repetir-se. De fet, Ilan Pappe havia de visitar Mallorca, teníem una data prevista i després va esclatar el 7 d'octubre i ho vàrem haver d'ajornar. Avui li volem agrair de tot cor que hagi acceptat aquesta invitació de la Universitat de les Illes Balears per parlar sobre la situació actual tant de Gaza com a la resta de Palestina, una realitat que ens arriba a Occident de manera fragmentada i sotmesa a nombrosos filtres. La nostra universitat se sent profundament honrada de rebre un historiador rigorós com ell, una veu científicament documentada que basa les seves anàlisis en fets històrics provats, lluny de relats de fantasia, fanatismes o interessos econòmics. Li agraïm que comparteixi el seu temps i coneixement amb nosaltres i que ens ajudi a aportar llum a una situació tan fosca com la que es viu actualment a l'altra ribera del Mediterrani. Thank you very much, Ilan.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Magdalena. Thank you to the university for inviting me. Thank you all for coming to hear me and hopefully discuss the issues of Palestine and Israel and beyond as much as we have time and energy. The title of my talk is The Challenges for Palestine in the 21st Century. And I think it is important to begin not so much with the present and the future, but to go back in history. You need to go back in history to understand the challenges for the Palestinians today and the challenges for the Palestinians in the future. This is not an easy task nowadays to talk about the past of Palestine. Those of you who have followed the events since the 7th of October 2023 would probably remember that after the attack of the Hamas on the 7th of October 2023, the United Nations General Secretary, Guterres, reacted by first condemning the attack, but then by saying it did not happen in a vacuum, which he meant there is an historical context to the attack. Even if you condemn it, you have to understand its context. Immediately, Israel demanded that he would be fired. And then this idea that if you talk about the context, you justify the attack, continued to be accepted by quite a few governments in the world. For example, in German universities, you are not allowed to say that there was a context for the attack of the Hamas. If you do that, you are accused of being an anti-Semite and a supporter of terror, which is ridiculous, of course, but nonetheless is happening. Where I come from now, the United Kingdom, in some universities it's quite similar. You cannot talk about the context without being blamed for supporting terrorism and anti-Semitism. But we need to talk about the context, because without the context we don't understand. And one of the problems with the report of the media, the coverage of the media on the events in the last year and a half, even by very respectable media outlets, mainstream media, is that, first of all, they don't have the time and the space to provide context, so it's a technical issue. But it's also an ideological issue, political issue. They don't want to provide the context because that will get them into trouble with the pro-Israeli lobby wherever they are. Israel is very clear what it demands from us. It says the 7th of October occurred because there is a country in the Middle East called Iran. It wants to destroy Israel. It has proxies, such as the Hamas, and the 7th of October is part of the Iranian plan to destroy the Jewish state. That's all you have to know. All the rest is anti-Semitism and support for terrorism. But of course, we know this is stupid, and we do insist, especially as academics, but also as activists, as journalists, that we want to understand violence. Not only the symptoms of violence, which is what happened on the 7th of October, and also the violence that Israel inflicted after the 7th of October, we want to understand the origin of the violence, not just the symptom of the violence. And the origins are very important, as I say, also for understanding what is facing the Palestinian in the near future and in the more distant future. I think the most important point to begin with is to remind people that although Zionism arrived in Palestine in the late 19th century, that is more than 120 years ago, that arrival in Palestine is still relevant for understanding what is going on today and what will happen in the future. Why did a group of Jews from Europe come to build a Jewish homeland in Palestine? A country that was not empty, which was full of Palestinians, who, like many other people around the world in that period, the late 19th century, were beginning to dream of national identity, liberation, modernization. They were normal people. They were not exceptionally good, not exceptionally bad. They were just normal people moving through history, as did the people of Lebanon, the people of Syria, the people of Egypt, Iraq, and so on. So why this particular country and these particular people were not allowed to progress in history like everyone else around them. That's the beginning of the story. And that's the relevance of the beginning of the story for today. The reason that these Palestinians were told very soon after the arrival of Zionism that unlike the people in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, and Iraq, they will not have an independent Palestine. They were told that the reason is because there is a problem in Europe, which is called anti-Semitism. So Zionism began as a European solution for a European problem. And Europe had a serious problem with this Jewish population. It was so serious that, of course, eventually it led to the genocide of Jews in Europe during the Second World War. But Europe did not solve, at least until the Second World War, the problem of anti-Semitism by fighting anti-Semitism in Europe. It fell in love with the idea that actually the best solution for the Jews in Europe is to go to Palestine. And this also attracted other people who wanted the idea of creating a European Jewish state in Palestine. First of all, evangelical Christians. A lot of people who were Protestants, evangelical Christians, believed in that particular period of the late 19th century that if the Jews returned to Palestine, as they called it, this will bring back the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, the end of time. For them, it was a plan by God that begins with the return of the Jews to Palestine, and the rest would follow. There was, of course, also a group of Jewish intellectuals and activists, especially in what today is the Ukraine, that began to think that there is no chance for Europe ever to accept the Jews as equals, and maybe they even accepted the anti-Semitic idea that the Jews maybe are not just a different religion, but a different nation. So they developed the idea that Judaism is not a religion, but is nationalism. And if you are a national movement, you need a national homeland. So where would be the national homeland for the Jews who suddenly decided that Judaism is not religion, but nationalism? What is interesting, that at the beginning they said, it doesn't have to be Palestine. They looked at other options. The most famous option they looked at was Uganda. But not only Uganda. They were discussing the possibility of Azerbaijan, the south of Chile, the north of the United States. All of these ideas did not come true. And more under the pressure of the Christian evangelicals, they focused more and more on Palestine. Now, did they know that they were coming to a place where someone else lived? The answer is yes. Did they think that in order to create a European Jewish state out of Europe, in the heart of the Arab world, in the heart of the Muslim world, at the expense of the native people of Palestine, did they think that this project can be done peacefully? The answer is no. They knew that if you want to turn an Arab country with a Muslim majority at the heart of the Arab world into a European Jewish state, you need to use force. Because there's no reason in the world why the people of Palestine would say, oh, what a great idea. You should come from Europe and we will leave our country. It's yours. No, you can only do it by force. What is even more worrying, that in order to sustain the project, you need force all the time. I'm 70 years old, lived most of my life, all of my life in many ways, in Israel. I don't remember one day that Israel did not use force to exist. Now, I was told as a child, the reason is because everybody hates us. And it took me time, the age of 22, 23, to start not believing, which is always healthy, not to believe my teachers, not to believe my parents. I always recommend it to my own children. And started to look myself at the story. And I said, no, this is not anti-Semitism. Israel is not fighting every day because it faces anti-Semitism. It fights every day because it is forcing itself on another people in the heart of another area, and it's not going to work unless there is a way of finding a solution that does not endanger the people of Palestine. Because the Palestinians, and I wrote about it quite a lot, when the early Zionists came to Palestine, the Palestinians received them quite nicely, because that's the Arab hospitality. They didn't think that they were receiving members of an ideological movement that wants to replace them. They thought that they received very poor Europeans who don't have any future in Europe, and they said, okay, they're welcome. Very soon, they started to understand that this is not an immigration for survival. This is an ideological immigration that wants to colonize their country, and the colonization can result in their own destruction and removal. And this has not changed. I mean, if you look at both the Hamas attack, it's a violent, very violent response to the ongoing insistence that the land of Palestine is not the land of Palestine, it's the land of Israel, and that the people of Palestine have no room in the land of Palestine. So sometimes the Palestinians react in a peaceful way, sometimes they react in a very violent way, but that's the issue. The issue is that with all the years that passed from the moment the Zionists arrived in Palestine, the cycle of violence, where the project of Zionism violently forces itself on the population reacts violently, the project, I can call it now the state, reacts even more violently when there is a resistance. The resistance, you know, it's a cycle. The resistance says, oh, we will also be more violent, and it goes on and on. So when people ask me, were you surprised by the level of brutality and violence that both the Hamas and the State of Israel displayed, first on the 7th of October, and then after the 7th of October, I said I wasn't surprised. I'm afraid so. I expected every Palestinian uprising to be more severe, and every Israeli reaction to another Palestinian uprising to be even more brutal than before. I didn't know the details, of course, but I'm talking about it in general. So that's a situation that continues today and will continue in the future, unfortunately, unless some other things would happen, and I will in a minute talk about what can happen that may be a bit more hopeful for all of us. But I think it's also important to understand that reality is a dynamic issue. It changes. So you cannot say that Palestine of 1882 is like Israel and Palestine in 2024. Of course, many things changed. For example, the Jewish state was not just a project of oppressing the Palestinians and not just colonizing Palestine. It was a project of a modern state. 8 million people who are in organic society, they created a state, and when I was part of that state, I was part of the culture, the Hebrew culture that they created and so on. So it becomes more complicated as the years go by. But also the Palestinians don't disappear. They don't disappear. Even if in 1948 Israel expelled half of Palestine's population, still half of the Palestinian people are in Palestine. And the rest many of them are in refugee camps which are not far from Palestine. So this is not over. I think that particularly important is to understand in this, what I call the dynamic of history, what happened in the last few years. So I gave you the general picture. Now we go a little bit more focused to the last 3 or 4 years. In 2022, and probably even before 2022, something happened in the Israeli Jewish society. And what happened there was not only related to Palestine and the Palestinians. What we discovered in Israel after more than 75 years, I would say more than 100 years of Zionism, that the idea that a religion is a national identity is not working. It's not working. What does it mean to be Jewish if you are not practicing Jew? What does it mean to be a Jew if you're not a religious Jew? What does it mean to be a secular Jew? Can someone be a secular religious person? It sounds oxymoron. Either you are a secular or you're not secular, right? But of course, life is more complicated than that. We understand that. But it created a huge problem in Israel. We found out that actually there are 2 Jewish societies. One that says to be a Jew is to be part of the West, to be liberal, to be modern. Unfortunately, this did not include to respect the rights of the Palestinians, but we'll put it aside. So you have a liberal secular Israel. I call it the old Israel. It's the dream of the old Israel. But next to it developed a different idea of what does it mean to be Jewish in Israel. It developed particularly in the Jewish settlements that Israel built in the West Bank. And then it had a lot of supporters inside Israel itself. Their idea is that if you are a Jew, especially if you live in a Jewish state has to act according to the Jewish law. And the Jewish law that was established 1,500 years ago still has to be relevant today. We know it from other religions, this fundamentalist idea that religious people might have, that they want to literally implement their holy writings as if history has not changed. So if the Old Testament says, cut the hand of the thief, you cut the hand of the thief. If it says you have to take one eye for any revenge, you take one eye out. We've seen it with the Islamic State. We've seen it, it's many examples. There are many examples. But now we have such a movement in Israel. I call it the state of Judea, that wants to rebuild the ancient biblical Israel they read about in the Old Testament. It has to be theocratic. So their enemies are not just the Palestinians, but also secular Jews. It has to be theocratic. It has to stretch over the land that we think the old biblical Israel in the Bible stretched over. So I don't think they will be content with the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I think they will remain in West Syria. They will remain in South Lebanon, and God knows where else they want to go. And what is so interesting about this group, that if I would have talked about it 15 years ago, I would say it's a marginal group of some crazy people. Don't take them too seriously. Now they are the government of Israel. And we were there before in history, when we thought some people were crazy, and then suddenly we found them in power. And they now are controlling not only the politics, they have a great influence on the army, on the secret service. They still didn't take over the judicial system, but they are making a big effort to occupy that as well. The view of the Palestinians is very clear. Palestinians do not exist as a people, and they don't have, and the best thing would be for them to leave the Jewish state, or they can be expelled from the Jewish state. That's why they got so excited when President Trump suggested that the best solution for Gaza is to expel all the Palestinians from Gaza to Jordan and Egypt. So I think what we are going to experience today, tomorrow, in the near future, is an attempt by this kind of Israel, not the old Israel, but the new kind of Israel, the one I call the State of Judea, to implement its idea. And they already started it in the West Bank. They already expelled 40,000 people in the West Bank, and they are going to continue to try and do it. And they feel that the fact that Donald Trump was elected is a part of the plan of God to allow this new state of Israel to become the most powerful empire in the Middle East, that people would either fear or respect, and it can rely on the President of America to play his role in this program. Now, how can I be optimistic if this is what I think is going to happen, is a very good question that you might ask. The reason I'm optimistic, and I'm an historian, so optimism for historians is they look at the long term, not tomorrow or the day after. The reason is because I think that kind of state of Israel, which I call the state of Judea, will not last. And not only it would not last, I think it signifies the end of the Zionist project. The whole idea that I was talking about when I began my lecture, the idea that you can solve the problem of anti-Semitism in Europe by creating a Jewish state in the Arab world. This is going to collapse, to my mind. It will take a long period. I'm not talking about tomorrow or the day after, but I think there are processes that would lead to its weakness, maybe its collapse, maybe its disintegration. I don't want to be a prophet and to say that I know exactly how it will happen, but it will happen. And it will happen not only because of, first of all, the struggle between the Jews themselves, as I just described it, the state of Judea and the old state of Israel. And unfortunately, those who are more liberal and more progressive Jews are not fighting back. They are leaving in great numbers Israel. But that's not the only process. Economically, Israel, because of that kind of policy that demands a lot of money for the army and security, is in a very bad economic shape. And like never before, it needs huge support from America. The third process, the army. The army is not as powerful as the Israeli thought. We have to remember, the Israeli army was fighting two guerrilla movements with no aircrafts, no air force, no navy, no tanks. Yes, you can say it had the upper hand in the end so far, but they were not fighting armies. Israel now needs tanks and aircrafts to defeat a few young people in a Jenin refugee camp. That doesn't bode well for the Israelis if they think that all their life they will have to fight if this is the kind of army that is supposed to defend them. And I think the confidence in the army is going to be a factor that could contribute to this disintegration that I'm talking about. There's another process which is very important, and that is the process of many young Jews in the world do not want to be associated with Zionism anymore, especially in the United States. And this is an important development, because without the support of the Jewish communities around the world, it would be very difficult for Israel to be accepted internationally. But also they needed the material support that comes with it. And then there is the international isolation of Israel. It's true that the governments of the world are still supporting Israel, but many people in the societies do not. We never had such a wide support for Palestine in the global civil society as we had in the last year and a half. The numbers are amazing and unprecedented. And if the numbers are so big, even if the political elites are not interested yet, it can change in the future, and it will change in the future, even when we talk about politics from above. I say it because as an historian, I know that a similar process occurred in oh, that's much better. I realize what I'm listening to. Sorry. I know it from history because the support for the ANC, the African National Congress, in its struggle against apartheid South Africa, had begun by the civil societies, when many governments in Europe still regarded Nelson Mandela as an arch-terrorist. So it took a long time before the position of the societies on apartheid South Africa were reflected in the policies of the government. And I think a similar process is taking place with regard to Israel, but it's a long process. Again, I'm warning, it's not for tomorrow or the day after, and it will take a time. I also think it's important to mention two other things that will impact the future. One is the Palestinian national movement. One of the reasons, three actually short things, and with this I would end. One is that the Palestinian national movement right now is not in a good place. It's disunited, it's fragmented, and many people who analyze the situation would say Israel will continue to do what it wants because the Palestinians are so disunited and fragmented and cannot challenge Israel. But they forget that the Palestinian society is one of the youngest in the world, and the younger generation is far more united, less factionalized, less fragmented, and I think there's a good hope there for revising the Palestinian leadership and organization. It's a process that has begun. It will take time to mature, but I think it will have a very positive impact, or positive or negative, depends on one's point of view, but it will have an impact on the reality of Israel in the next 10, 20 years. The second, another process to point to is what's happening around Israel. We keep forgetting, because Israelis tell us all the time, that Israel is not in the Arab world, that it's in Europe. That's why they go to Eurovision, European football. But it's still in the Middle East, after all. And it's not only in the Middle East, it is in a particular part of the Middle East, what we used to call in Europe the Levant, or in Arabic the Mashriq, the Eastern Mediterranean. And that political part was created as nation states by two colonial powers after the First World War, Britain and France. And they created it in order to enable them to control the people. And this is not working. Syria already disintegrated. Lebanon is in a very volatile situation, and it's not going to end there. So the whole structure that includes Israel is not working after many years that it was attempted by the West to create a political system that would serve the West, but not necessarily the people. And that is now being challenged. And it will not stop on the borders of Israel, it will include Israel. So there will be an earthquake, not just in Israel, political earthquake, I think. There will be in the area as a whole. Finally, one of the reasons that people find, and with this I would, how am I doing with time? I'm okay. Okay. Finally, I would say that when people hear my analysis, say to me, what are you talking about? Donald Trump in the White House. Right-wing governments are winning everywhere. Will win in Spain, probably, unfortunately. Anybody who's right-wing is automatically pro-Israeli. It's like when you are born into a certain conservative mindset, in the DNA you have to be pro-Israeli. It's probably a precondition to join the right. In any case, you have, they said, so where will the change come from? And I say, this is absolutely true. I think the certain rise of political powers in the world, populist leaders, populist parties, one can say even fascist parties or neo-fascist parties, are helping Israel. If these political forces, and I include in this Donald Trump, President Modi in India, the president now in Argentina, other examples also in other countries. Of course, if these political forces are dominating politics in their own countries, the change I'm talking about will not happen immediately. It slows down the change. But every moment that we are able, or people are able to challenge that kind of politics, the processes I'm talking about will be accelerated. So it's not only hopeful news for the Palestinians, it's also good news for the Palestinians if they will get their act together and have the right movement and so on. Any successful struggle in the world for human rights, for civil rights, for democracy benefits the Palestinian. Every failure in this struggle benefits the kind of Israel we have today. It could be bad news, but it could be also good news because it means they are not alone. It's not just about Palestine. It's not just about Palestine. And it's not just about, and with this I will end, it's not just about politics in every country. The kind of politics we have today in many countries, populist, as I said, in some cases, not everywhere, but some cases even fascist, very nationalistic, prevent the world to work together towards challenges that you can only deal with on an international level. You cannot deal with global warming from one country. You need the whole world to collaborate on global warming, otherwise it will fail. You cannot deal with poverty in the world without global cooperation. You cannot deal with migration as a country policy. You need everyone to be involved in the question of migration if you want to make sure that it is humane and works and so on. If you don't do it on a global cooperation, none of these problems would be solved. And I think that is where Palestine benefits, because the more the forces in the world that are seeking cooperation are successful, it also includes a just solution for the Palestinians. And I think there is a connection there, and a lot of young people feel it. When I went to a demonstration in London, 1 million people. I was never in a demonstration. I don't know if any of you ever participated in a demonstration of 1 million people. This is an experience for life. Many people were there who are part of the movement for more green energy, for animal rights. I mean, it was the whole coalition of people who are working against injustices that they see in their own societies, believing that the injustice for the Palestinian represents their own struggle for injustice. So that gives me hope. Because if I would think that the Palestinians are alone against the Israelis, they have no chance. The military balance, the economic balance, the diplomatic balance, I think that then I would have been really worried that the Palestinians and Palestine would be wiped out, as the current Israeli government wants to do. But I don't think they are alone. And they don't have the help of the powerful governments, the multinational corporations. It is true. But many of us don't have the help of these governments and multinational corporations for other issues that trouble us. So I think there is a hope there. But it's a long way. It's to sum up, I'm very worried about what the current Israeli government will do, is already doing, but will do to the Palestinians in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian citizens of Israel. But I am hopeful that unfortunately this kind of behavior can lead to a better future. Of course, as an activist, I would say always, let's do our best to make sure that the bad period is short and the good period is long. I think I'll stop here. We have enough time to hear your questions and comments.
Qui vol començar? Fer-li...
Yes, so good evening. First of all, I would like to thank you for inspiring talk, full of hope, and at the same time express our gratitude to our university, Magdalena, for making it possible. So here we are several representatives of Universitat per Palestina, which is a collective which is included or a part of a network of 57 out of 60 public universities in Spain. So for the past year, we have been working together hand in hand to compel our institutions, our universities, to oppose Israeli apartheid and Israeli genocide and Israeli scholasticide. So today we're speaking on behalf of our colleagues who are attending the talk from all the sides of the country. So with this in mind, I have a question. Maybe I made the question in Catalan, if the interpreter doesn't mind. So, pas a català. Bé, jo crec que observam, tinc una reflexió més que una pregunta, que observant i ha estat aquí dit, aquest poder de comunicació que té el control de la narrativa, que té aquesta societat pro-sionista, aquesta informació esbiaixada de les notícies, de les fake news, de les xarxes socials, X, Facebook. Avui tothom ha vist aquesta estracanada de Trump, Gaza Trump, insultant, caracteritzant, no sé com dir-ho, i fins i tot oposant-se a altres informacions, altres documentals, altres que serien realment mostrar la cara real de sionisme i la cara real d'aquest genocidi en directe que estem experimentant. Per exemple, per contrarrestar In Other Country, aquest documental que està nominat per Òscar, però que encara no està distribuït als Estats Units. Per tant, la meva pregunta amb una persona que ha anat parlant d'institucions, universitats, és com aquesta realitat tan esbiaixada, aquesta informació tan interposada per l'esquerra dreta, quines accions podríem fer des de diferents col·lectius com el nostre, com hauríem d'articular davant aquesta propaganda, paraula que en alemany és nazi-propaganda, dels feixistes, a fer que el relat del genocidi realment arribi a la nostra societat, en el col·lectiu dels nostres estudiants, que segurament hauran vist qualsevol vídeo, o estic tots, però no hauran anat a veure In Other Land. I això, perquè arribin de manera clara i convincent a la resta de la societat. Bé, moltes gràcies.
Thank you. Yes, it's a big challenge. Definitely it's a generalization, but most of the mainstream media does not share the narrative that we were talking about today, no doubt. And the alternative media sometimes have very good sources on Palestine, but it's the alternative media, so it can go anywhere. I do believe that universities have an important role here. Because in so many Western universities for many years, Zionism, the movement of Zionism, was not taught as a colonialist movement. It was only in the departments that studied or taught about nationalism, nation states, modernization, enlightenment, progress. That's where you learn about Israel, part of the civilized world, part of the European world. The conflict is a conflict that you learn about in political science department, how to manage a conflict. And only recently we began to, in some places, but this has to be done elsewhere, to give the right academic context for studying Palestine and Israel. Because I think for many years we were taught that if we will teach that Zionism is a colonialist movement or a settler colonialist movement, if we will teach that Israel is an apartheid state, if we will teach that Israel in 1948 committed ethnic cleansing, and now if we will teach in the future that Israel committed genocide in the Gaza Strip, all these we were told by our universities is a political position. But we should insist that this is not political position. This is a pure academic, scholarly position. Defining Zionism as colonialism is academically correct, not politically correct, not ideologically correct. And we never insisted on it. Yeah. And I think we should insist, one of the reasons I was expelled from my university in Haifa. And I looked for a job in England. And one of my conditions when I had to choose to which university to go is I asked every university, if I come to you, can I build an academic unit on Palestine? I said to them, not near the university, but part of the university, organic part of the university. And it took time, and finally I found the University of Exeter in southwest England, and they agreed, and we created the first ever academic program on Palestine studies, in which we insisted that if we teach Zionism as colonialism, if we teach what happened in 1948 as ethnic cleansing, we are doing it because of our academic expertise, not because of our political position. And I'm glad to say that after that, a similar program developed in 2 or 3 universities in the United States, and another program in SOAS in London. Unfortunately, in Europe, there is no such program. But I have a lot of students, so they are like my agents. And one of them is going to open the first such program, and she got the confirmation for this in the University of Lisbon in Portugal. So I'm very glad there will be the first ever unit on Palestine studies in Europe after 120 years of Zionism in the University of Lisbon. Hopefully this will also happen in other places. You have a lot of academic units which are called the Centers for Israel Studies, all over the place. Israel is allowed to enter the universities of Europe, create centers that preach the Israeli narrative. We have, as I say, very few counter narrative, and these are academic counter narratives, not political or ideological. I think that could be a very, very important mission for us, because we are academics. There is a limit to what we can do. We cannot do more than our profession allows us to do. But I think we can do much more, much more. The second thing, of course, every university is both a business and management and a community of scholars. As a community of scholars, I think many of us are willing to accept the call of the Palestinian civil society for boycotting Israeli universities. what is called the BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanction. But as academics, we are members of a community, but we are also under management. We're under a certain control. And our managements usually don't want to go that way, but we should insist on it. And I think that's an important message. Boycott for me is not a punishment. For me, boycott is having a very tough conversation with the Israeli academics, that if they think that they are not taking direct part in the genocide, that's okay. I know from my own parents in Germany that they hated mostly the academics who were not Nazis, but didn't do anything. I'm not comparing, so because it's for the record, people say you have this is against the law, but I also don't compare because I don't believe in the comparison. But I do think it's important to understand that this is a very important conversation to have with the Israeli academics. Your silence is like taking part in the crime. And if you're silent, we are telling you what we think about it. So I think there's a lot to be done still to do that. Thank
you. Okay. Good evening. Thanks. It's a pleasure to meet you and to listen to you. I listen to most of your YouTube talks, and yeah, I'm like, it's like addiction. I like what you do, what you say, what you talk about. I mean, the idea like this is kind of just out of curiosity, because the idea of a great Israel is that a fanatic idea? Because like in 2019 or 17, Smotrich went to conference in Paris. He has the map of Israel and Jordan, where I am from, and it's like went fine. Nobody talks about it. Imagine Pedro Sanchez go with a map, Spain and Portugal, and I go to sleep. Before I sleep, I see Israel is expanding in Syria. Nobody talks about it. Then they go bomb Lebanon. Nobody talks about it. And they could do, we might, it would happen because they have, nobody can question that. So is that kind of something that would, they talk about something serious, or just, it's just an iron wall, etc.? So yeah, that's the idea. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think what happens with European politicians, even some Arab politicians, and definitely in other countries, is that they are afraid to challenge Israel because it's a mighty project. I'm not talking about even challenge militarily. I'm saying even condemning Israel, taking Israel out of the United Nations, or doing what the world did to apartheid South Africa. Because the Israeli lobby was working for so many years, and it's so powerful. And it is powerful not just because it is effective. It is powerful because the West is still Islamophobic. The West still thinks that having Jews in Palestine is better than having Arabs in Palestine. Christian fundamentalists still think that Jesus Christ is not coming because Israel is not occupying West Syria. And so it's a powerful coalition. It's a very powerful coalition. I think for the more conscientious politicians in Europe and in America, and also elsewhere, it's very convenient, it was very convenient, to have the more liberal Israelis in power. Because the liberal Israelis would do the same thing as the present Israelis, but they would say, we are in West Syria just for 1 year, just to see how things are. We don't want West Syria. Of course, they would stay there. We are in South Lebanon just to defend until the ceasefire, and of course, they would stay there. Somehow they believed the Israelis, they wanted to believe the Israelis that things are temporary. But one of the reasons I'm hopeful, if one can call it hopeful, but at least that I think that this is not going to last, is that Israel since 2022 is not lying anymore, doesn't play the game anymore. They say, we want West Syria, it belongs to us. Smotrich. We want Jordan. Jordan is part of the land of Israel. I think it will take time, but it will happen, that like those secular Israelis, people around the world would say, wait a minute, these are not this is not a marginal group. This is Israel. You know, you can see it in the Israeli diplomatic crops nowadays. In some embassies in Europe, you still have the old diplomats of Israel. And they are suffering. They're trying to explain a policy they don't agree with. But now they're being replaced by the new government. But you can see the process. You can see the process between a diplomat from the old Israel who would lie. He would lie to you. He said, no, we are not annexing, we are not. And a new diplomat that belongs to the new Israel would say to you, we do it because we have the right, the religious right, the ideological right, the moral right to do it. So again, I would take them very seriously, but I don't think that they will succeed. But of course, nothing happens in a vacuum. If the Arab world or members of the Arab world would continue to seek normalization, then it cannot play a productive role in changing the reality. If political elites in the West would continue to ignore the situation, thinking that it's limited to Palestine, which is, they are wrong, this would happen too. But you know, I'm not, the people won't misunderstand me. I don't think that, for example, Iran, as it is now, can play a positive role. I think a more reformed Iran that takes care about its own human rights can be a very important factor. What we need is changes that make the Arab world and the Middle East, so it's not just the Arab world, it's Turkey, Iran as well, more representative, more respectful of human rights and civil rights, because we need them much more than we need America for moving on. Because after all, the Jews are 8 million in a world of 300 million Arabs. It's impossible to say that what they do will determine the future of 300 million Arabs. It doesn't stand to reason. But for that, you need changes, political changes in the Middle East, not only in the Arab world. Also, the Muslim world can play a far more important role. I'm thinking about countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia. You can change the balance that you are talking about. The balance can change. And balance that changes does not necessarily mean that you need to use a lot of violence. The moment people would understand that the balance can change, they would change as well. We saw what happened in apartheid South Africa. Eventually, some of the whites, at least, understood that it's time to end apartheid. And not because they were defeated militarily. Because if you defeat a country by force, nobody wins. That's more violence, and we don't want it. That's not the future we are looking for. Yeah.
Hello. Well, almost a year ago, we had a camp here in the university, in the campus, and lots of students that are now here in this room were participating there. Thank you very much, because your teachings and your work, your research, was very fundamental for us in order to understand the deepness of this genocide, colonial, imperial. But I want to point out, not in you, but in the brand you have in your head, which is the University of the Balearic Islands. Yes, because there is a big contradiction now in this room, and it's not your contradiction, it's from this business, which is a university that today, have you here speaking for us, but when our organization previously to this camp did a presentation which was called 10 Myths About Israel, which is one great book of Ilan Pappe, we were treated as anti-Semitic in the newspaper, and the rector of the university treated us as terrorist colleagues. Also in the camp finished because the police entered into the campus, into the university. We were expelled from the university. Palestine was expelled from university. Free speech was expelled from university. And we can say that WIP, the University of the Balearic Island, chose the Israeli mode of resolving problems. And that was all. My question is, and I want to all the room know it, that for you maybe now is a complex, I'm putting you in a complex situation, but the question is, what would like you to say to these representatives, to these leaders, to this rectorate, which today tries to wash their image or its image, which is the message to these people who are collaborating with the group CAN, who is a group related to weapon business, and also related to Banco Santander, which is one of the biggest weapon business and financial conglomerates in Spain who is collaborating with the Zionist state. Which words are to be said to these people to change their businesses? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. No. Thank you. Thank you. You know, in my own university, the student did an encampment as well, and the university was unhappy about the encampment, and we negotiated all the time. As happened in some universities in England, we eventually reached an agreement to end the encampment in the summer, but it was not evicted by force. In some universities, it was evicted by force. What I'm trying to say by this is that this is an important struggle for freedom of speech, for freedom of research. As I pointed before, universities are two things that are contradictory in many ways. It is a community of scholars, but it's also a business. And you're dealing with the business side, the management side, which has its own concerns, its own interests, but it's like the government. I don't see any difference from trying to pressure by all legal diplomatic means the Spanish government to do much more than it does towards Israel. And for me, university management is like a little government in that respect. So I support these actions, not of the government, of the students, who misunderstand me. I think that this is an important struggle. I think it should continue. I don't know how much experience we all have, but from my long time as an activist, I know that sometimes it's good to be pragmatic, sometimes it's good to be purist, depends on the situation, you know, but I'm not telling people, didn't even tell my own student when I didn't agree with everything they did in Exeter. But I told them that, you know, from my experience, sometimes pragmatism is also important in the struggle. By the way, again, the whole situation that you describe is the microcosmos of what's happening outside the campus. I'll give you an example. The million of people that demonstrated in London represented political forces that don't agree about many things. The left, the right, Muslim communities, Arab communities, but they all felt that the case of Palestine unites them. And then we ask ourselves, how do we take it from the demonstration and create such a political force? Because the left says, only the left can do it. But that's a purist approach that Palestine doesn't have the luxury to afford, you know? Sometimes you have to build a coalition of forces that, at least on the case of Palestine, shares your idea. So I think that, I don't know the university structure here good enough, but I'm sure there are academic staff that agree with you, not talking about the management. I'm sure the academic staff, the people who agree with you. And I think that struggles like this continue, and they have ups and downs, but I would condemn a government and I would condemn a university management if it, in any way, directly or indirectly, is complicit in the genocide. Our students in Exeter, just one example, did proper research to see how much the University of Exeter collaborates with companies that build weapons for Israel. And the moment they did the proper academic research on it, the university was convinced to close at least one of the units, not all of them. As I say, it's pragmatism. You can't always get everything. But yeah, I think this, you know, whatever you can do, don't be surprised by the reaction. The reaction is not always because the Israeli lobby is so powerful, because managements and governments don't like changes and don't like to be accused. They don't mind that you would be accused, but they don't want to be accused themselves. But it's a long struggle. You need a deep rest here. It will not end in a year or two, but it will be successful. I'm sure it will be.
Thank you very much for your inspiring talk and all your hope. I have to say that I am a bit pessimistic, sorry. Talking about the narrative, I see that the Israeli propaganda is emptying the meaning of many words, such as democracy, as terrorism. That's probably some of the most relevant ones. And I think to be able to think, we need some words with the proper definitions. And the definition is not longer existing for many words. So what do you think about that? And the second thing I would like to ask you is, how is the Israeli society today? Some of the people might know here that the young generation in Israel have been taught and educated in a way to not like the Palestinian, and a big part of the Israeli society, I believe you might be able to give me some answers, but is very against the Palestinian people. So how is the Israeli society today? Is he extreme right, or are there some more? So that's the second one. And the third one is, many people compare Zionism to the Nazi movement. Mm-hmm. What do you think also of this comparison when people are using, I believe, to provocate, but compare Zionism to the Nazis?
Yeah, okay. Okay. The first question, I think that it's not the Israelis who are emptying the term democracy or are abusing the term terrorism. It's a lot of people in the West who are using the situation in Gaza to give new definitions to what is democracy and terrorism. We were there before, after 9/11. The non-democratic forces in society, sometimes around secret service institutions, sometimes around agencies and so on, maybe even some universities, who all the time think there are too many freedoms in society and they don't like it, use as an excuse an event like 9/11 or an event like the attack of the Hamas on the 7th of October to say, oh, now we have a good opportunity to tell people not what to say and what not to say. And to make sure that all these people that we allowed too much freedom to bring them into order or punish them. You could see it in the attitude of some European governments to people who originally came from the Arab world or were part of the Muslim society, that they said after 7th of October, suddenly a citizen of Germany that identifies with the suffering of the Palestinian becomes a terrorist, just because he or she showed compassion. Or more absurdly, a very democratic idea that everybody in Palestine should be free, Jews and Arabs, between the river and the sea is a call for terrorism. Now, this is not just the making of the Israelis. This plays into the hands of anti-democratic forces in supposedly democratic societies who find democracy as being too much and doesn't allow them total control of the population. And that's what is so dangerous in such a situation. So I think that the struggle for freedom of speech, and as also the students now talked about, it's not just a struggle. It would be a mistake to say we want freedom of speech on Palestine. We want freedom of speech, period. We want our right to identify with the suffering of people. And we don't want the hypocrisy. We don't want people in Europe to say, oh, the Ukrainians are defending the country and we respect so much when they kill Russian soldiers and they use violence in order to defend the country. Every little building in Spain has the Ukrainian flag on it. But when the Palestinians are doing the same, they are terrorists. So that is where Europe cannot, we in Europe cannot say, oh, it's because of the Israelis. It's our fight. Forget about the Israelis. It's our fight not to allow hypocrisy, not to allow double talk, not to allow our tax money, our governments to collaborate with anyone in the world that uses racism, fanaticism, colonialism, and ethnic cleansing. Anyone. And especially not allow some countries like Israel to be out of this category. It's the fight against exceptionalism that I think is very, very important here. And it's in every walk of life. Your second question about the Israeli society, Jewish society. No, I'm afraid the next generation or the current young generation are mostly racist, fanatic. There's very little hope for change within Israel in the near future. If you look at the generation, the young generation, if you look at the educational system, as you rightly say. But that, of course, strategically means that you cannot rely on a change within Israel. So you have to put pressure from the outside. You need the region, you need the international community to change it, because the change will not come from within. And sometimes it happens in history. You cannot rely on it. And the whole peace process that the Americans were leading was based on this assumption that there's a peace camp in Israel. But there never was a peace camp in Israel. Never was. Now, even more than ever before, there is no peace camp. Now, Nazism, and I don't like equating anything with Nazism, because my whole family was, most of my family was perished in the Holocaust. I don't see the advantage of it. I think it's bad enough if I'm saying that the Israelis are committing crimes against humanity, are committing war crimes, and they should be treated for these crimes. It doesn't help to compare it to the Nazis. In fact, I think it plays into the hands of the Israelis if you do that. Also, from an academic point of view, it's not the same. On the other hand, I'm the one who fights that nobody would say that the only genocide was the Holocaust. So But in this particular context, I was reminds me, I had friends in Khalil, Hebron, who used to call me when he was very angry with what was happening and said, you know, what the Israelis are doing is even worse than what the Nazis did. And I said to him, Abdallah, if it's as bad as the Nazis, it's not good enough. It has to be even worse than the Nazis. You know, you get into a territory which is not very helpful. And remember, now Israel is abusing the Holocaust memory by saying that the Hamas are the Nazis and that what happened on the 7th of October is like the Holocaust, and that the Israeli prisoners that arrived, that were replaced, are like the people who survived the concentration camps. This is an equation that I think helps Israel, whereas a very clear reliance on international law, human rights, civil rights, shows that Israel is, as a state, is an apartheid state, and as an ideological movement, it's a colonialist, racist movement. If the world would accept this, we would be in a good place. We don't need them to think about Nazis. Yeah.
Darrera qüestió, perquè the last one. Okay.
Okay.
Hello, I'll try to speak in English. I don't know if you have had the chance to have a walk here in this. Okay. So here we have a past of coexistence of Jewish population, Christian population, and another population. And it was really, really productive time. For example, one of the main pieces of cartography, which represents the renaissance of the cartography in the Western countries, was made here by Hafuda Creskes and Abraham Creskes, which were Jewish cartographers. It's super, super beautiful to have a look at it. And after that, well, the cartography expanded to the north, and you can, if you have a look to this antique cartography, how they represent the Levant, it's a colonial view.
Yeah, of course.
In fact, there's some of these productions, these cartographies, are oriented from the west to the east.
Yeah.
So it's just, they turn around the perspective, no? Just because it's beautiful in some way because there's the peregrine view, but in the other, it's not so nice because it's colonial. So my question is, don't you think that maybe building a Mediterranean identity, a true Mediterranean identity, could be a good path to leave behind all this colonialism, which comes mainly from the misunderstanding between our say, both sides of the Mediterranean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that in some parts of the south of the Mediterranean, that is North Africa and the East Mediterranean, the Mashriq, as they call it in Arabic, or the Levant, I would not call the relationship between Europe and these countries misunderstanding. It was colonization, it was oppression, and it was quite violent. And I think that rebuilding the relationship, which definitely would benefit everyone, there's no doubt about that, cannot be done by forgetting the past. It doesn't work like this. And it's not done by not being accountable for the past. And therefore, I think that it's a process that in international law, we had some very good work on it. So, life together between colonized and colonizer cannot immediately happen because of so many years of injustice. So we have quite good mechanism in international law called transitional law, transitional justice, restorative justice. These are processes by which some of it was applied in apartheid South Africa and other places. You acknowledge, first of all, the crimes committed against the people, and then you try to compensate as much as you can for those crimes, and then build a system that makes sure that the crime is not happening again. And I think even for the Euro-Mediterranean or Mediterranean identity, you will not be able to move on without Palestine. And I'll tell you why. Because Palestine is still a colonialist project. Algeria is not a colonialist project anymore. Tunisia is not a colonial project anymore. There's one still colonialist project, which is Palestine. And until we don't apply transitional justice and restorative justice to Palestine, the whole Mediterranean issue is problematic. And what do I mean by this? I mean that I'm not talking about taking the Jews out of Palestine and sending them back to their homeland. Their homeland, most of the Jews like me in Israel, this is our homeland. So there was an Iranian president who said we should all go. This is not realistic. Of course, this is our homeland. We are part now of this issue. But in order for these identities to be respected, you need, first of all, I always call it the 3 A's. The first A is acknowledgement. You have to acknowledge. I mean, Palestinians need to hear, not only from Israelis, but from Europe as well. They still have to hear today, which is crazy, that in 1948, they became refugees because Israel committed ethnic cleansing. There is not one European leader who is willing to say it today, not to mention one Israeli leader. They need to hear it. It doesn't mean that tomorrow they will say, oh, because of that you all have to go. But it's like a person who is a victim of a crime, and then the crime that he or she suffered from is denied. It's experiencing the crime twice, when it happened and when it is denied. So first of all, you need this. You won't move to a Mediterranean, even North Africa, that seems to be detached from what's happening in Palestine. Is not detached from what's happening in Palestine. Secondly, the third aid is accountability. It's not enough to acknowledge. You need to take responsibility for what you did. In the case of Palestine, for me, it's very clear. You need to allow the refugees to return. Otherwise, you don't show any accountability. Not to mention that you have to redistribute the natural resources and so on, but rebuild something that promises equality. Then the third A is acceptance. Then you can tell the Arab world, the Palestinians, you have to accept the millions of Jews who live in Palestine as legitimate people in the area. But you cannot ask for this acceptance if you don't do the first 2 stages. With all the bad things, and there are a lot of bad things to be said about the Ottoman Empire, many bad things, but with all the bad things, it respected collective identities. And it allowed collective identities to live, coexist, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that structure, in many ways, was more humane than the nation-state structure that sometimes ignores or oppresses other groups. So the Mediterranean needs a future which is less nationalistic, more egalitarian, but one that knows about the past, respects the past, and deals with the past. If you deny the past, it will come back to haunt you again and again and again. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.